Let's jump right into this explainer. You know, when most of us picture modern Spain, our minds probably go straight to vibrant flamenco dancing, world-class football, or maybe some of that breathtaking architecture, right? But long before any of that was even a thought, this land was basically a massive crossroads of empires. It was this incredibly dynamic place where Romans built mighty cities, Islamic scholars completely transformed science, and Christian kingdoms fought for literally centuries to reclaim the peninsula.
Which brings us to a really fascinating question. How was Spain actually born? To truly understand the origins of this incredible nation, we can't just look at modern history. No way. We have to travel back a staggering amount of time, over 3,000 years actually, and peel back the layers of history to see exactly how the whole shebang was put together.
First off, let's just set the geographic stage a bit. Spain takes up the vast majority of the Iberian Peninsula in southwestern Europe. It shares borders with Portugal, France, the tiny nation of Andorra, and it's wrapped right around by the Mediterranean Sea. Today, it's one of the most visited countries on the planet. But archaeological discoveries like those surprisingly sophisticated ancient cave paintings in Altamira, well, they show us that humans have actually been shaping this specific land for hundreds of thousands of years.
Fast forward to around the first millennium BCE, and this region was turning into an incredible melting pot. You had the Iberians hanging out along the eastern and southern coasts, and the Celts occupying much of the north and west. Eventually, they kind of blended together into what we call the Celtiberian world. But they definitely weren't alone. Eastern Mediterranean traders, we're talking Phoenicians, Greeks, and Carthaginians, started arriving on the coasts, and they brought with them revolutionary new technologies, advanced writing systems, and these massive, sprawling trade networks.
Then everything shifted, and I mean absolutely dramatically. The year was 218 BCE. During the Second Punic War, Rome didn't just decide to explore the Iberian Peninsula, they invaded it to crush their rivals, the Carthaginians. What started as a focused military campaign turned into this grueling, decades-long conquest. Ultimately, Rome took full control, and they gave the land a brand new name, Hispania.
For nearly 6 centuries, Hispania wasn't just some distant, neglected colony. It was an absolutely crucial pillar of the Roman world. The Romans poured concrete and stone to build heavy infrastructure, sprawling roads, towering aqueducts, theaters, entirely new cities. They completely rewired the society with Roman law. In fact, Hispania became so integral to the whole empire that it even produced some of Rome's absolute greatest figures, like the emperors Trajan and Hadrian.
But the absolute most crucial thing Rome left behind, it wasn't made of stone. It was vulgar Latin. That was the everyday, spoken Latin of the Roman Empire. Now, why does this matter to us today? Well, because if you've ever spoken, studied, or even just listened to Spanish, you are essentially experiencing the direct modern evolution of vulgar Latin.
But, as history is always eager to remind us, no empire lasts forever, right? By the 5th century CE, the mighty Western Roman Empire started to buckle. It was basically collapsing under its own weight. This created a massive power vacuum which practically invited Germanic tribes to sweep right into the peninsula. Out of all that chaos, one group emerged as the top dog, the Visigoths. The Visigoths set up their new capital in Toledo, shifting the center of power right to the middle of the peninsula. And they were smart about it. They didn't just destroy what Rome had built. They preserved Roman institutions, but they wove in their own traditions. Toledo blossomed into a major religious hub. Yet, if you looked just beneath the surface, the kingdom was dangerously fragile. They were constantly divided by these bitter internal struggles for power. And, well, that weakness left the door wide open.
Okay, 711. That is a number you absolutely need to lock into your brain. In the year 711 CE, the entire course of Spanish history changed literally overnight. A Muslim army crossed the narrow Strait of Gibraltar from North Africa. And because the Visigothic kingdom was already so incredibly weak, within just a few short years, the vast majority of the Iberian Peninsula fell under Muslim control.
They named this newly conquered territory Al-Andalus. But I really want to emphasize something here. This wasn't just some change in military management. Not at all. This was the ignition of a remarkable cultural and scientific transformation. I mean, it literally lit up the dark ages of Europe.
This era truly was a golden age. Cities like Seville, Granada, and especially Cordoba, they flourished in ways that are honestly hard to overstate. Just imagine walking through a city filled with massive libraries, containing hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. And this is at a time when much of the continent was barely even reading.
Scholars in Al-Andalus made absolutely groundbreaking contributions to mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. And the architecture, the magnificent Great Mosque of Cordoba, is still standing as one of the crowning achievements of the medieval world. Now, if we pause for a second and compare these two monumental layers of history, Roman Hispania and Al-Andalus, you can really see how perfectly they complement each other. Rome laid down the physical skeleton, right? The sprawling roads, the aqueducts, that rigid system of law. Then, Al-Andalus came in with this incredible wave of intellectual breakthroughs, advanced agriculture, and intricate architecture. Both of these empires left a permanent imprint on Spain's language, its cuisine, and its culture, stuff you can still experience today.
But history never sits still, does it? While Al-Andalus was thriving brilliantly down in the south, up in the rugged, mountainous north, these small Christian kingdoms had managed to survive the initial conquest. Over time, kingdoms like Asturias, Leon, Castile, Aragon, and Navarre started this slow, incredibly stubborn expansion southward. And that right there was the spark of what would become known as the Reconquista.
800. Just think about the massive scale of that number for a second. The Reconquista wasn't a single battle, it wasn't some quick war with a neat little ending. It was a grueling, relentless series of campaigns, constantly shifting alliances and slowly moving borders that lasted for nearly 800 years. Think about that. That is dozens of generations born into a peninsula completely defined by a shifting frontier. So between 711 and 1492 CE, the Christian kingdoms relentlessly pushed those borders further and further south. One of the absolute most crucial turning points happened right in the middle in the year 1212 at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa. A coalition of Christian forces achieved this crushing, decisive victory. After that, Muslim rule was eventually isolated to just one major kingdom in the deep south, Granada.
The end game really began in 1469 with a royal union that essentially redrew the map. The marriage of Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon united two of the peninsula's absolute most powerful kingdoms. Now, this marriage didn't magically create modern Spain overnight, but it laid the concrete political bedrock for a unified Spanish monarchy. Together, they finally had the power to finish what had started nearly 8 centuries prior.
Which brings us to 1492, the big one. This is the monumental climax of this entire era. In 1492, that last remaining Muslim kingdom, Granada, finally surrendered to Ferdinand and Isabella. After nearly 8 centuries, Muslim rule in Iberia officially came to an end. It was the definitive conclusion of the Reconquista.
But actually, 1492 wasn't just an ending, was it? It was an explosive new beginning, because in that exact same year, another event happened that would instantly change the entire trajectory of global history. A Genoese navigator named Christopher Columbus, sailing under the newly unified Spanish crown, set out across the Atlantic Ocean. With that single voyage, Spain boldly stepped onto the world stage and totally kicked off the Age of Discovery. As our source material so profoundly summarizes it, the birth of Spain is truly the story of civilizations layered upon one another. I mean, think about what we've covered in this explainer. Early prehistoric tribes, Mediterranean traders, Roman engineers, Visigothic kings, and the brilliant scholars of Al-Andalus. Every single one of them poured their culture, their ideas, and their blood into the foundation of the modern Spanish state. You literally cannot understand Spain without understanding every single one of these layers.
So that leaves us with a deeply provocative final question. What happens when a layered civilization, one forged by 3,000 years of constant conquest, intellectual rebirth, and holy war, suddenly steps onto boats and becomes a global superpower? How did this newly unified nation go on to build one of the largest and most influential empires in all of human history? Well, that is exactly what we are going to explore next. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time as we cross the Atlantic.